So for chapter 25, there really are no corrections. You can pretty much go through that chapter. I mean, they are going to have you add some font colors and different things, and you can change those colors to whatever you want. We are going to be using that same app when you move on to chapter 26. So you're going to complete all of chapter 26 as well. And we'll have to make a couple little adjustments to the app for chapter 26. And one of the adjustments is there was a blue background that they had in the app. And so in your main page XAML file, you are going to want to add this little rectangle. And it does not need to be these colors. So if you want a little different coloring in your gradient, feel free to change that because I did. So I didn't really like the blues, so I went with a little different color scheme, and that is okay. You guys can do that. It's all you're doing is changing colors, so it's certainly not going to break the app. And you can see I use dark goldenrod and brown. Otherwise, I kept the rectangles kind of the same. Okay, so this is, what the author had, but as I said, you can change those colors. Other things that I noticed going through this chapter is that when you modify the definition of the customer class, you're going to be implementing an interface called iNotify property changed. Make sure you put a space between the class, the colon, and the interface. Because if you don't, you are going to get an error later on in this chapter. So put that space in there and you will not have problems. Another thing I noticed, and this was throughout the different chapters, is not null flagged an error for me. I had to change it to not equal null. And then another thing that I did have to adjust, and this is for the view model that we're going to be creating, is all of the private access modifiers I had to change to public. And this was in my customer CS file. So you guys are going to want to do the same thing as well. Couple other things of note. There was a typo on page 704. So you can see this was the original code and there was no object created here. So you do need to create the object. Okay, and then use that down here where you are setting the data context. And then when I ran the app, being picky as I am, the word previous, and I can run this and show you, but up in the command bar, the word previous, the S was wrapped, and that bugged me. So if it bothers you, you can fix it. All you really have to do is set a width to that button, and I set mine to 100, and it no longer wrapped. Okay, so chapters 25 and 26 are actually pretty straightforward. Chapter 27 is harder because this is where we are going into Azure, and things get a little dicey sometimes when you're working in Azure. So as a student, you should be able to sign up for a free account. Otherwise, there are free accounts that you can use for non-students as well. But both will give you $100 in credits. And the web API that we're setting up, the way we're going to set it up is it uses up like $4 a month or something like that. So I've got mine running, you can see. And, when the course is all over, then you can get rid of it. Okay. But for right now, it's going to run. And then once the course is over, you guys can basically come in here, check it off, and delete the thing. Okay. That way you're not going to, use up all of your credits. But for right now, you need it. And it should not be uh, chewing up a lot of the credits that you have because of the way we are creating it. Okay? We are not creating it to use a whole bunch of resources. So that is all in the directions for chapter 27. Your first step is going to be to get your account. Once you have your account and you log in, then you're going to need to create the database with the sample data. And so these are the steps that you're going to follow. It's a little different than the screenshots from the book. Um, I mean, unless Microsoft changes Azure within the next week, what you see should be similar to what I have. Okay, so these are the steps that you are going to follow. And then you'll notice once you create the database that there are several little sections of it. And the basics page is one that you need to make quite a few changes. So I've kind of outlined the changes that you may need to make here. You're going to have to create a SQL database. And they did recommend, the author recommends just using your own name as the server name. So I did that. Do take note of whatever you pick for your login password. You'll need to do that here. And then you're also going to have to click on Set Admin, which displays this. And you'll pick Azure SQL Database there. Under compute and storage, you definitely need to configure that because by default, the one that they have is like $347 a month. And so you're going to change it to basic, and that's going to cost you $4.90 a month. Okay, so huge difference. Make sure you go in and configure that. But basically, what I did was I took screenshots as I was going through and configuring this. So you could see exactly what I did. And this, I got it all working. So I'm thinking you're going to want to do something similar. And because you guys are given $100 in credits, you don't really have to worry about that $4.90, especially after I correct this project. What you're going to end up doing is coming in here and deleting it. Okay. Go into all resources, you can put a little check there, and you can just get rid of the thing. Okay? And you can actually get rid of that one too. Okay? And then you should not be incurring any cost. Okay? So we'll try to keep this affordable so that no one is charged anything. So as you walk through here, this is all about, getting this database with the sample data deployed. Okay, and then you do have to kind of configure the firewall, which I noted here exactly what I did. And then you can begin following the book on page 724. And you're instructed to remove columns from the sample database. The database will actually, you'll be able to pull that up in Visual Studio, and that's where you will remove those columns from. But before you do that, there are a couple of changes that you're going to need to make to your customer app. So you're going to open up your customer app, and on the main page, you'll notice that there's a couple additional buttons that we're adding for basically the first and the last customer. And then your viewModel.cs, you're going to replace it with the code that is in here. And this is just includes the code for the first and the last customer. Okay, so it's primarily the same thing that you guys had before with, some extra code in it. And then the rest of these instructions are just little differences that exist now. For example, Um, .NET 6 no longer has a startup CS file. So you need to make your changes in program CS. Um, and so it's going to be a little different than the book. So I can actually show you that. Okay, so you'll notice that, the method they say to look for doesn't exist because startup doesn't exist. Basically what they did was they simplified how you do connecting. And so what you need to do is look for builder.services.add-controller, and then you're going to add your code above that. Okay, and so it's very similar to the code that the author has, but it is not the same. Okay, so this is the code that you need to use. And then for your connection string, that is in app settings. And so here it is, and I entered mine in one long string. If I pressed enter in the middle, it messed it up and it didn't work. Okay, so that is my long string, and it does pretty much match what the author has. And you might think, oh my gosh, I'm the typo king or queen, and how am I going to key all that in? Um, Actually, a little helpful hint here. Um, if you go into your database and you go into connection strings, uh, it is, most of it is right here. Okay, so you can actually highlight that and copy it and then paste it in. And then you can just kind of tweak it to match, what the textbook author has. And obviously, you'll have to key in the password that you set, when you were creating this. But that does save you a little bit of time when it comes to keying all of that in. And let's see. Okay, so I mentioned that that string has to be on one line, the one I just showed you. And then they do have you kind of run your API. And so what I noticed when I ran my API was that it tried to retrieve everything and I got an internal server error. And so what I did was I tested the get with the ID. So I just keyed in an ID and that worked. So that told me that, yeah, the API is working. So later on in the project, they do have you code an offset and account. And so when you get the offset and the count added, you will be able to test the get. Okay. And you can see um, it retrieves like 10 fine, but if you try to do more than that, you'll probably get a server error. And that's because we didn't assign a whole lot of resources to the database when we created it. And we didn't assign a lot of resources because we didn't want it to cost a lot of money. Okay, so um, anyway, so just keep that in mind. It's probably going to give you an error before you put offset and count in. Um, but you will be able to see if it works by checking the get on the ID. Okay, in fact, let me show you. So if I right click on this debug and start a new instance, that's going to launch that API. Okay. And so initially you're not going to see offset and count. Um, you'll say try it out and execute, and it's probably going to come back with an error. Okay. But down here, we've got to get with the ID. Okay. And so if you want to make sure that yours is working, you can just enter an ID in here. execute. And as long as the ID is in the, you know, database, and number 5 is, it should retrieve it. And that tells me that, yep, my API is working. Okay. Um, then once you add the code for the offset and count, you'll be able to come in here and you'll actually be able to test the get as well. Okay. And that should work there. Now, if I put too many in here, I'm going to get that same error. So if I do 20, I'm probably going to get the error. Yep, here is the error. Okay, so I would anticipate a lot of you are going to get that. And no worries, it doesn't mean it's not working. It just means it can't retrieve that many. Okay. Looking through there's a couple other little tweaks I had to make to various instructions so that they would work. And so here you can see for JSON serialized options, I'd say new JSON serialized options. I believe in the book, they just have new. Okay? This wasn't in there. I had to add it for it to work. And then down here, I had to add system.net.http.headers. That had to go in front of media type with quality header value. Once I added that, no longer got the error. Okay. This mentions the error that I got with a batch size of 100, so I decreased it to 10. So as you go through here, I am trying to kind of give you a heads up on different places where you could have errors. In this instruction up here on page 756, you also have to give it your address for your API. So how do you find that if you happen to have closed the publish tab? Okay, well, if you have the tab open, that's pretty easy because it's right here. Okay, so, but if you close this, you can just open it back up. You can just right click and select publish, and that just opens it back up. Okay, so you can get it right there. Let's see, moving through here. One weird thing, at least on my app, when I ran it and I ask for more, sometimes I would get this error, right? But then I'd hit more again and I would actually see more data, but the error still displayed. And that bugged me, right? Because if I hit more, it should go away. So I fixed that. So I'm going to show you how to fix it. If it bothers you, but really there's not an error if it retrieves more data. So all you have to do to fix that is in the view model CS in the get data async method. At the beginning of the try, just put this dot last error equals blank. That blanks it out. And so I did the same thing on the find. Okay. Obviously, when there is an error, you want to see the message, but if you're retrieving more or doing a different find, there is no reason to see an old error message. So that gets rid of it. Okay, so make sure you kind of refer to this, especially when you're in that last chapter, chapter 27. Hopefully, I have flagged everything that you guys are going to run into that is problematic, other than your own typos, which can't help you too much with. So this project can take quite a long time to finish. Do not try to do it in one sitting. In fact, when I went through this, it took me a whole day for chapter 27. Okay, so plan accordingly.